The dust-laden wind carried whispers of Daisy Lockhart's arrival to Silver Creek, long before her carriage wheels rattled down the town's only proper street. By 1878, the small Wyoming settlement had seen its share of newcomers searching for fortune or fleeing from trouble, but none quite like the auburn-haired beauty, whose emerald eyes surveyed the weathered storefronts with thinly veiled disappointment. Daisy stepped down from the stagecoach, her fine blue traveling dress marking her immediately as an outsider. She adjusted her matching hat, shielding her fair complexion from the relentless western sun. The daughter of a Boston banker, she had been raised amid luxury and refinement. Silver Creek, with its muddy Main Street and ramshackle buildings, seemed a far cry from the promising settlement her father's business associate had described in his letters. "Miss Lockhart?" A portly man with a magnificent mustache rushed forward. "Henry Thompson, at your service." "Your father's telegram said you'd be arriving today. I trust your journey wasn't too arduous," Daisy forced a polite smile. "It was educational, Mr. Thompson. I've never seen such vast expanses of nothing before." Thompson chuckled nervously. "Well, we're a growing community, Miss Lockhart. Your father's investment in our bank will help bring civilization to this wild country. Now, let me escort you to your accommodations." As Thompson led her toward the town's only hotel, Daisy felt the weight of stares following her. Silver Creek's residents made little attempt to hide their curiosity. Men tipped their hats while women whispered behind gloved hands, but one gaze felt different from the others, more intense, more deliberate. From the shadowed porch of the Silver Dollar Saloon, a tall figure watched her progress down the street. Broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, with sun-bronzed skin and a well-worn Stetson pulled low over his eyes, the man stood utterly still, like a predator assessing new prey. "That there's Kyle Grayson," Thompson whispered, noticing her glance. "Best cattle hand in the territory, but he keeps to himself mostly. Rides for the Circle M Ranch." Daisy found herself inexplicably drawn to the silent observer, but quickly averted her gaze. She hadn't come to this dusty outpost to be distracted by some rough-hewn cowboy, handsome though he might be. She had a purpose, one that would require all her wits. "I'm rather tired, Mr. Thompson," she said. "Perhaps you could continue our discussion tomorrow after I've rested." Of course. The hotel isn't much by Boston standards, but Mrs. Peterson keeps it clean." Once alone in her modest room, Daisy's carefully maintained composure crumbled. She sank onto the narrow bed, fingers trembling as she withdrew a worn letter from her handbag. The paper was creased from repeated readings, the elegant handwriting familiar as her own reflection. "Dearest Daisy," it began. "By the time you read this, I will be gone. The consumption leaves me little time, but I must unburden my soul. Your father's financial troubles are worse than he has admitted. His partnership with Simon Blackstone is not what it seems." The letter detailed her late mother's suspicions that Blackstone had systematically defrauded their family, using her father's good name to establish questionable ventures across the Western Territories. Silver Creek's bank was merely the latest in a string of such operations. Daisy had come not as her father's representative, but as his unknowing savior. She would gather evidence of Blackstone's duplicity and restore her family's honor without her father ever knowing of her interference. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Lockhart, Mrs. Peterson's voice called. "Supper will be served in the dining room at 6, and a gentleman has left a calling card for you." Curious, Daisy opened the door to accept a small white card. Elegant script announced, "Ethan Ward at your service." Below was a handwritten invitation to dinner the following evening. "Who is Mr. Ward?" she asked the landlady. "Owns the biggest ranch outside town," Mrs. Peterson replied. "Moved here 3 years ago from back east, quite the gentleman and unmarried, too." The older woman's meaningful glance made Daisy's intentions clear. How thoughtful. "Please inform Mr. Ward that I would be delighted to accept." After Mrs. Peterson departed, Daisy sat at the small writing desk, penning a careful entry in her journal. If she was to navigate the complexities of Silver Creek society, she would need allies, and Ethan Ward might prove useful. The evening meal was simple but hearty. Daisy ate while listening to the conversations around her, gathering impressions of her new surroundings. Silver Creek, it seemed, was divided between the old settlers, mostly ranchers and shopkeepers, who'd weathered the territory's hardships, and newer arrivals drawn by prospects of wealth as the railroad expanded westward. She retired early, but sleep proved elusive. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the piercing gaze of the silent cowboy who'd watched her from the shadows. Morning brought clearer skies and a sense of purpose. Daisy dressed in a practical sage-colored walking dress and set out to acquaint herself with the town. The bank, her primary objective, was a surprisingly substantial building of brick and timber with large windows fronting the main street. "Good morning, Miss Lockhart." Thompson materialized beside her. "I was just about to call on you. Would you care for a tour of our establishment?" The bank's interior was well appointed, with polished counters and a large vault visible behind an iron gate. Several clerks worked at orderly desks, and customers came and went with frequency that suggested a thriving business. "Your father's investment has allowed us to expand considerably," Thompson explained proudly. "Mr. Blackstone foresaw the opportunities when others doubted." "And where is Mr. Blackstone?" Daisy inquired, careful to keep her tone merely curious. "I understood he would be here to greet me." "Business in Denver, I'm afraid. He sends his regrets and assures me he'll return within the fortnight." This was both disappointment and relief. Daisy would have preferred to take the measure of her quarry immediately, but his absence would give her time to investigate more freely. "Perhaps you could show me the ledgers," she suggested. "Father would appreciate a thorough accounting of his investment." Thompson's smile faltered. "The books are quite complex, Miss Lockhart. I wouldn't want to burden you with such tedious details." "I assure you, Mr. Thompson, I'm quite familiar with banking practices. Father made certain I understood our family business." Before Thompson could respond, the bank's door swung open with such force that the glass rattled in its frame. A man strode in, the same broad-shouldered cowboy who had watched Daisy's arrival the previous day. Up close, he was even more imposing, well over 6 feet tall, with features carved by sun and wind into rugged planes. His blue eyes were startlingly vivid against his tanned skin. "Mr. Grayson," Thompson said, his tone noticeably cooler. "How may we assist you today?" Kyle Grayson removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair in need of a trim. "Came to make a deposit for Mr. Mitchell." He produced an envelope from his vest pocket. "Of course." Thompson accepted it with obvious reluctance. "Miss Lockhart, may I present Kyle Grayson, foreman of the Circle M Ranch. Mr. Grayson, this is Miss Daisy Lockhart, daughter of our principal investor from Boston." Grayson's eyes met hers, and Daisy felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. "Madam," he said simply, with a slight nod, "Mr. Grayson." She extended her hand, partly out of ingrained social courtesy and partly from a desire to assert herself in this unfamiliar territory. After a moment's hesitation, he took her hand. His palm was calloused, his grip careful, as if he was conscious of his strength. "Welcome to Silver Creek." "Thank you. Are you enjoying your work at the Circle M, was it?" Something flickered in his expression, wariness perhaps, or surprise at her direct question. "It's honest work." "Mr. Grayson isn't much for conversation, Miss Lockhart," Thompson interjected. "Circle M has been struggling since old Mitchell took ill. Some say it won't survive another winter." A muscle tightened in Grayson's jaw. "Circle M will be standing long after some other businesses fold, Mr. Thompson." His gaze shifted back to Daisy. "Don't believe everything you hear in Silver Creek, Miss Lockhart. Appearances can be deceiving." With that cryptic remark, he replaced his hat and departed, leaving Daisy puzzled by both his warning and her own reaction to him. "Forgive his rudeness," Thompson said quickly. "Some of the local ranchers resent the bank's influence. They cling to the old ways while progress marches forward." What did he mean about appearances being deceiving? Thompson waved dismissively. "Just the usual complaints about loan terms. Now, shall I show you the rest of our facilities?" For the remainder of the morning, Daisy followed Thompson through the bank, noting details and inconsistencies. Despite his assurances of prosperity, she observed telling signs of haste in the construction corners that didn't quite meet, paint hastily applied to cover flaws. The ledgers, when she finally insisted on seeing them, were meticulously kept, perhaps too meticulously. Years in her father's counting house had taught her that real business was messier, with corrections and annotations that told the true story of commerce. By midday, her suspicions were solidified. Something was amiss at Silver Creek Bank, though whether it was simple mismanagement or deliberate fraud remained unclear. Luncheon at the hotel gave her an opportunity to observe more of the town's residents. Mrs. Peterson proved a fountain of local knowledge, readily sharing gossip about everyone from the mayor to the blacksmith's apprentice. "And what of Mr. Grayson?" Daisy asked, striving for casual interest. Mr. Thompson seemed rather cool toward him. "Kyle Grayson, Mrs. Peterson lowered her voice. "Came here 5 years ago, didn't say much about where from, started as a ranch hand, worked his way up to foreman at Circle M. Frank Mitchell trusts him like a son, which ruffles feathers with those who think outsiders shouldn't rise too quickly. Is he trustworthy?" "Honest as the day is long, if you ask me. Doesn't drink much, doesn't gamble, keeps to himself mostly." Mrs. Peterson smiled knowingly. "Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him, but he shows no interest. Some say he left a sweetheart behind somewhere, others think he's married to his work. And Mr. Ward, I'm dining with him this evening. Now there's a gentleman." Mrs. Peterson's expression brightened. "Educated, cultured, generous to a fault. His ranch, the Golden W, is the showpiece of the territory. They say he's looking to expand further, maybe even build a mansion once he finds the right wife." The implication was clear. Ethan Ward would be a suitable match for someone of Daisy's background, while Kyle Grayson was decidedly not. After lunch, Daisy wrote a lengthy letter to her father, carefully edited to suggest that all was well in Silver Creek. She omitted her suspicions and her true purpose, knowing he would forbid her investigation if he suspected it. At 58, Edward Lockhart's health was fragile, and Daisy had no intention of causing him further distress. As evening approached, she prepared for her dinner with Ethan Ward. She chose her finest dress, a deep burgundy silk with delicate lace trim, and arranged her hair in a fashionable style. Whatever Ward's character might be, he represented an opportunity to learn more about Silver Creek's business affairs. Precisely at 7, a polished carriage arrived at the hotel. The driver helped Daisy inside, where Ethan Ward awaited. He was handsome in a conventional way, tall, fair-haired, with regular features and an easy smile. His tailored suit spoke of wealth and taste. "Miss Lockhart, you're even lovelier than I'd been told." He took her hand, his touch lingering longer than strictly proper. "I've arranged for us to dine at my home. I hope you don't find that presumptuous." "Not at all, Mr. Ward." Daisy smiled politely. "I look forward to seeing more of Silver Creek and its surroundings." As the carriage rolled through town and into the countryside, Ward proved an attentive companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing anecdotes about the area's development. His ranch house, when they arrived, was impressive, a sprawling 2-story structure with wide verandas and large windows, surrounded by manicured gardens that must have required constant attention in the arid climate. Inside, the decor reflected wealth and Eastern tastes, imported furniture, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that seemed more suited to a Boston drawing room than a Wyoming ranch. Servants moved silently, serving an elaborate meal on fine china. "You've created quite an oasis, Mr. Ward," Daisy observed as they dined. "Please call me Ethan." His smile was practiced charm. "I believe comfort needn't be sacrificed merely because one lives on the frontier. Don't you agree? It's certainly impressive. Have you been in Silver Creek long?" 3 years. I saw the potential here before most." He leaned forward slightly. "Just as your father did, his investment in our bank demonstrates remarkable foresight." Throughout dinner, Ward spoke eloquently about his vision for Silver Creek Railroad connections, manufacturing, perhaps even a university someday. He described partnerships with Eastern investors, including several names Daisy recognized from her father's circle. "And how do you find our little community, Miss Lockhart? Quite different from Boston, I imagine." "It's certainly raw," she replied honestly, "but not without charm. The people seem hardy and resourceful." Some are, Ward agreed. Others cling to outdated notions. They resist progress, preferring their cattle to civilization. You don't raise cattle yourself. I diversify my interests. Cattle, yes, but also mining claims, real estate, transportation. The future belongs to those who adapt. He refilled her wine glass. I understand you met Kyle Grayson today. The sudden change of subject startled her. Briefly at the bank, do you know him well? We have differing philosophies. Ward's expression cooled momentarily before his charm reasserted itself. He's competent with cattle, I'll grant him that. But he lacks vision or perhaps ambition. Mitchell's ranch struggles while mine prospers. There's a lesson there, don't you think? Perhaps, Daisy said noncommittally. Though I've heard Mr. Mitchell has been ill, true enough, and with no son to inherit, the Circle MTK's future is uncertain. Ward studied her over his wine glass. I've made offers to purchase it, but Mitchell refuses to sell. Sentiment over sense, a common failing in these parts. As the evening progressed, Daisy found herself increasingly uncomfortable with Ward's attention. Though impeccably polite, there was something calculating in his gaze that reminded her uncomfortably of certain gentlemen in Boston, whose interest had been more in her family's wealth than in her person. When he escorted her to the carriage for the return journey, his hand at her waist seemed possessive rather than courteous. I hope this is the first of many evenings together, Daisy. May I call on you tomorrow? You're very kind, but I have several appointments related to Father's business. Of course, your dedication is admirable. He raised her hand to his lips. Until later, then. Back at the hotel, Daisy recorded her impressions in her journal. Ward's interest in her father's investments seemed excessive, and his comments about Kyle Grayson had carried an undercurrent of animosity that went beyond mere business rivalry. The following morning, Daisy decided to visit the land office. If Silver Creek Bank was engaged in questionable practices, there might be evidence in property transfers or loan records. Donning a practical navy walking dress, she set out early, only to discover the land office wouldn't open until 9. With time to spare, she wandered toward the livery stable. Having grown up riding in Boston's parks, she thought perhaps she might hire a mount to explore the surrounding countryside. The stable yard was a hive of activity. Cowboys were saddling horses, wagons were being loaded with supplies, and the blacksmith's hammer rang out rhythmically from the forge. Amid the bustle, Daisy spotted a familiar figure, Kyle Grayson, deep in conversation with an older man whose stooped posture and lined face spoke of years and hardship. As she approached, she caught fragments of their discussion. Can't hold out much longer, Kyle. The terms are impossible. Mr. Mitchell, you can't sell to Ward. Once he controls the water rights, I know, son, I know, but with these new loan conditions. Grayson noticed Daisy and abruptly fell silent. Mitchell turned to see what had caught his attention. Good morning, Daisy said, feeling awkward at having overheard their conversation. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Miss Lockhart, Grayson replied, though his expression suggested otherwise. This is Frank Mitchell, owner of Circle M Ranch. Mr. Mitchell, Miss Daisy Lockhart from Boston. Madam, Mitchell touched his hat brim. You're Edward Lockhart's daughter, fine man your father, did business with him years ago when I was buying breeding stock from the East. You know my father, Daisy hadn't expected this connection. Met him in Chicago in '65. He was financing agricultural improvements after the war, straightest dealer I ever encountered. Mitchell's roomy eyes studied her. He doing well as can be expected, Mr. Mitchell. Age and recent financial concerns have taken their toll. Financial concerns? Mitchell exchanged a look with Grayson. That surprises me. Your father struck me as the cautious type. Even the most prudent can be misled by those they trust, Daisy said carefully. Before Mitchell could respond, a commotion erupted near the main street. A wagon had overturned, spilling barrels across the road. People rushed to help, including Mitchell, who moved with surprising agility for his apparent age. Left momentarily alone with Grayson, Daisy decided directness might yield results. Mr. Grayson, what did you mean yesterday about appearances being deceiving? He studied her silently before answering. Silver Creek isn't what it seems, Miss Lockhart. Neither are some of its leading citizens. Are you referring to Mr. Ward? Ward's part of it, but there's more. Grayson glanced toward the bank. Your father's money isn't being used the way he thinks. The bank's lending practices have changed recently. Interest rates doubled, foreclosure terms shortened. They're squeezing ranchers who have been here for decades, forcing sales. To whom? Companies that trace back to Ward, though the ownership's hidden behind layers of paper, and your Mr. Blackstone is helping him. Daisy's suspicions crystallized. That aligns with what I feared, but why? What's their purpose? Railroads coming through next year. The route's been decided, though it's not public knowledge yet. Whoever controls the land along that route stands to make a fortune. Grayson's eyes held her steadily. And whoever's invested in the bank that fails after properties are stripped of value will lose everything. The implications stunned her. You're suggesting Ward and Blackstone intend to bankrupt the bank after using its funds to acquire land. That's exactly what I'm suggesting. It's happened before in Colorado, in Nebraska. Different names, same scheme. Grayson's voice hardened. Good people lose everything while men like Ward walk away richer. You seem remarkably well-informed for a ranch foreman. Something flickered in his eyes, caution, perhaps. I pay attention, and I've seen this pattern before. Why are you telling me this? You don't know me. I know your father's reputation, and I've been watching you how you question things, notice details. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. You didn't come here just to represent your father, did you? You're looking for something. Daisy hesitated, torn between caution and a strange certainty that she could trust this man. My mother wrote to me before she died last year. She had suspicions about my father's business associate, Simon Blackstone. When father announced this investment and my opportunity to travel here, I decided to investigate. Grayson nodded slowly. Brave of you coming alone. Necessary, she corrected. Father would never have permitted it if he knew my true purpose. The conversation ended abruptly as Mitchell returned, brushing dust from his hands. Mess is cleared up. Now, Kyle, about those water rights, perhaps we could continue this discussion elsewhere, Grayson interrupted with a meaningful glance at Daisy. Mitchell seemed to understand. Of course. Miss Lockhart, it was a pleasure meeting you. Please give your father my regards when you write. As the men departed, Daisy felt both enlightened and troubled. If Grayson was correct, her father's investment was in grave danger, and so were the livelihoods of Silver Creek's residents. The land office provided further evidence supporting Grayson's claims. Through careful questioning and the pretense of considering investments of her own, Daisy learned that numerous properties had recently changed hands, many through foreclosures managed by the bank. The new owners were various companies with different names but similar registration dates. By late afternoon, she had compiled enough information to be deeply concerned. Returning to the hotel, she found an invitation waiting. Ethan Ward had arranged a social gathering at his ranch the following evening to introduce Miss Lockhart to Silver Creek society. The timing was inconvenient, but the opportunity to observe Ward among his associates was too valuable to decline. Daisy penned a gracious acceptance, then continued organizing her notes. She would need irrefutable evidence before confronting Blackstone upon his return. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. Opening the door, she was surprised to find Kyle Grayson standing in the hallway, hat in hand. Mr. Grayson, how did you, Mrs. Peterson, let me in? Said it wasn't proper, but she'd make an exception since I rarely call on ladies. A hint of amusement softened his features. May I speak with you? It's important. Propriety demanded she refuse a man entry to her private room, but curiosity prevailed. Leaving the door ajar, she invited him to sit by the window where they would be visible from the street, minimizing gossip. I've found something you should see. From his vest pocket, Grayson produced a folded document. This is a map of the proposed railroad route. Notice where it crosses Mitchell's property and continues through land that's recently changed hands. The map confirmed their suspicions. The railroad would transform worthless scrubland into valuable commercial property land that Ward's shell companies were systematically acquiring. Where did you get this? Daisy asked. Let's just say I have connections in the surveyor's office. Grayson's expression turned grim. There's more. Blackstone returns tomorrow, not in 2 weeks as Thompson claimed. And he's bringing Eastern investors probably to show them the properties before the railroad announcement becomes public. How can you possibly know this? Telegraph operator owes me a favor. Blackstone wired ahead from Cheyenne. Grayson leaned forward intently. Miss Lockhart, you need to be careful. If Ward or Blackstone suspect you're investigating them, they'd hardly harm a woman in broad daylight. Men like that don't dirty their own hands. Accidents happen, especially to those who ask too many questions. His concern seemed genuine. Ward's gathering tomorrow night I'd advise against attending. On the contrary, it's the perfect opportunity to observe them together. Daisy met his worried gaze steadily. I didn't travel 2,000 miles to retreat at the first sign of danger, Mr. Grayson. A reluctant smile tugged at his mouth. You're either very brave or very stubborn, Miss Lockhart. Perhaps both. And please call me Daisy. Conspirators should be on a first-name basis, don't you think? His smile widened briefly. Kyle, then. Will you be at this gathering tomorrow, Kyle? He shook his head. Ward and I don't exactly socialize, but I'll be nearby if you need assistance. Wear something with blue, a ribbon or handkerchief. That way I'll recognize you from a distance. After he left, Daisy pondered their unlikely alliance. Kyle Grayson was not what she had initially assumed beneath the rough exterior, was a keen intelligence and a strong sense of justice. His concern for her safety was touching, though she wasn't entirely convinced of the danger. The following day brought Simon Blackstone to Silver Creek, just as Kyle had predicted. From her window, Daisy watched his arrival, a portly man in an expensive suit, accompanied by 3 distinguished-looking gentlemen who could only be the investors Kyle had mentioned. They proceeded directly to the bank, where Thompson greeted them effusively. Daisy spent the morning reviewing her evidence and planning her approach. If she confronted Blackstone directly, he would simply deny everything. She needed leverage, something that would force him to abandon his scheme without publicly exposing her father's poor judgment in trusting him. By late afternoon, she was preparing for Ward's gathering. She chose a green evening gown with blue trim, pinning additional blue ribbons in her hair in accordance with Kyle's suggestion. The effect was perhaps more conspicuous than fashion dictated, but it would serve its purpose. Ward's carriage collected her promptly at 7. The ranch house blazed with light, and the sound of a small orchestra drifted from the open windows. Inside, at least 50 guests mingled in the opulent drawing room. Silver Creek's merchants and professionals, visiting dignitaries, and the investors Daisy had seen arriving with Blackstone. Miss Lockhart, Ward hurried to greet her, taking both her hands in his. You look absolutely enchanting. Come, there are people eager to meet you. He guided her through the crowd, introducing her as the daughter of our esteemed partner, Edward Lockhart. The investors regarded her with interest, particularly when Ward mentioned her father's substantial stake in the bank. Your father shows remarkable foresight, Miss Lockhart, one gentleman commented. This territory will be transformed within 5 years. Indeed, Daisy replied carefully. Though I wonder if the transformation will benefit those who have built lives here already. The man exchanged glances with his companions. Progress always creates winners and losers, my dear. The astute positioned themselves accordingly. Before she could respond, Blackstone appeared at her elbow. Shorter than she'd expected, with thinning hair and small, shrewd eyes, he exuded an artificial bonhomie that immediately put her on guard. Miss Lockhart, Simon Blackstone, at your service. Your father speaks of you constantly. He pumped her hand enthusiastically. How wonderful that you could join us in this grand adventure. I trust Thompson has shown you our thriving operation. He has indeed, Mr. Blackstone. Most illuminating. Daisy smiled pleasantly. I've been exploring the area quite thoroughly. Silver Creek has such interesting patterns of development. Something flickered in Blackstone's eyes, a momentary wariness quickly concealed. Development is our specialty, my dear, creating opportunity where others see only wilderness. Or where others have already established homes and livelihoods, she countered gently. Blackstone's smile tightened. Progress requires change, Miss Lockhart. Sentiment is a poor foundation for business decisions. How curious. That's precisely what Mr. Ward said regarding Mr. Mitchell's reluctance to sell his ranch. The atmosphere chilled perceptibly. Ward appeared beside them, his hand possessively at Daisy's elbow. "I see you've met our partner, my dear. Simon has been instrumental in identifying investment opportunities here, so I gather." Daisy extricated herself from his grasp. "If you'll excuse me, gentlemen, I believe refreshment is in order." Moving to the far side of the room, Daisy positioned herself near an open window. The night air carried the scent of sage and distant wood smoke. Somewhere in the darkness, Kyle was watching. The thought provided unexpected comfort. Throughout the evening, she observed the interactions between Ward, Blackstone, and the investors. Their confidence was absolute. They clearly believed their scheme beyond discovery. Occasionally, she caught Ward watching her with a mixture of appreciation and calculation that made her skin crawl. As the gathering reached its peak, Ward called for attention. Glasses of champagne were distributed as he prepared to make an announcement. "Friends, colleagues, honored guests, we stand at the threshold of a new era for Silver Creek. Tomorrow morning, we will formalize agreements that will bring unprecedented prosperity to our community." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Ward raised his glass higher, to progress to prosperity, and his gaze fixed on Daisy, to new partnerships, both business and perhaps personal. The implication was unmistakable. As guests sipped their champagne, Ward made his way to Daisy's side. "I hope my little toast didn't embarrass you," he said softly, "but I believe in stating intentions clearly. Clarity is admirable, Mr. Ward." Daisy maintained her composure with effort, though perhaps premature in this instance. "Is it?" His fingers brushed her arm. "We would make an excellent match, Daisy. Your Eastern connections, my Western empire. Together we could build something remarkable." "At whose expense?" The words escaped before she could reconsider. Ward's expression hardened momentarily. "I don't take your meaning, don't you?" "The foreclosures, the shell companies, the railroad route, it's quite an elaborate scheme." Silence stretched between them, taut as piano wire. Ward's charming facade slipped, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "You've been making inquiries. How enterprising of you." "I prefer to understand my father's investments thoroughly." "And do you understand?" Ward moved closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Business requires vision and occasionally ruthlessness. Your father understands this. Why else would he partner with Blackstone, whose methods are hardly secret in financial circles?" The implication shocked her. "My father is an honorable man. Your father is a practical man who turns a convenient blind eye when profits require it." Ward's smile returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Just as you might find it practical to consider my proposal carefully. After all, your family's financial recovery depends largely on the success of our ventures here." Daisy felt trapped. Ward was suggesting her father was complicit in their dishonest practices, a suggestion that challenged everything she believed about Edward Lockhart. Worse, he was implying that her cooperation could be purchased with financial security. "You underestimate both my father and myself, Mr. Ward." "Do I?" He touched her cheek lightly. "Consider carefully before making enemies, Daisy. Silver Creek is a small pond, and I own most of the water." The threat, though veiled, was unmistakable. Daisy stepped back, heart pounding. "If you'll excuse me, I find I need some air." Without waiting for his response, she moved toward the veranda doors. Outside, the night was cool and star-filled. She breathed deeply, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Ward's insinuations about her father couldn't be true, yet they planted seeds of doubt that troubled her deeply. "Problems with your suitor?" Daisy whirled to find Kyle emerging from the shadows beside the veranda. Relief washed through her. "You startled me. Sorry." He didn't sound particularly apologetic. "Saw you talking with Ward. You looked upset." "He implied my father might be aware of their fraudulent activities." Daisy's voice trembled slightly. "That's impossible. My father would never." "I believe you." Kyle's simple statement steadied her. "Ward's trying to manipulate you. It's what he does." He also made it clear that opposing him would be unwise. She attempted a smile. "I'm beginning to think you were right about the danger." "I usually am." He glanced over her shoulder toward the house. "We should talk somewhere else. Can you slip away?" "Meet me by the large oak beyond the garden in 10 minutes. Daisy nodded, returning inside with renewed composure. She made her excuses to several guests, claiming a headache, then found Ward to thank him for the evening, leaving so soon. His disappointment seemed genuine. "At least allow me to have my driver take you back to town." "Thank you, but I've already arranged transportation." The lie came easily. "The fresh air will help my headache." Ward's eyes narrowed slightly. "As you wish. We'll continue our conversation tomorrow, perhaps. I have a proposal regarding your father's investment that I think you'll find compelling." "I look forward to it," Daisy replied, maintaining her pleasant facade. Once outside, she hurried toward the designated meeting place, grateful for the moonlight that illuminated the path. Kyle waited beneath the ancient oak, his horse tethered nearby. "You came." Relief colored his voice. "Did you doubt I would? Wasn't sure Ward would let you leave." Kyle helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. "Thompson's watching the hotel. We need to go elsewhere to talk." The ride through the moonlit landscape was both terrifying and exhilarating. Daisy was acutely aware of Kyle's proximity, his arm around her waist to steady her as the horse navigated the uneven terrain. They rode for perhaps 20 minutes before reaching a small cabin nestled against a rocky hillside. "Mitchell's Line Shack," Kyle explained, helping her dismount. "No one uses it this time of year." Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean, a single room with a bed, table, chairs, and small cookstove. Kyle lit a lamp, casting warm light across the weathered timbers. "It's not what you're used to," he said, watching her expression. "It's perfect." Daisy sat at the rough-hewn table. "Now, tell me what you know about Ward's plans." Kyle built a small fire in the stove before joining her. "Tomorrow, they're finalizing the purchase of the Golden Crown mine. It's worthless for ore, but the land sits right where the railroad will need to build a depot. They're paying pennies on the dollar because the owner's desperate after the bank called in his loan. And my father's money is funding these loans, partly. But more importantly, his name and reputation give the bank credibility. When it fails, which it will, once they've stripped out all value, your father will take much of the blame, destroying his reputation along with his finances." Daisy's hands clenched. "How do we stop them?" Kyle studied her for a long moment. "We need proof of the fraud documentation showing the connection between Ward's companies and the properties being foreclosed upon, and evidence they knew about the railroad route before it was public. The bank records might show the first part, but how would we prove the second?" "I have a contact at the railroad survey office who can testify they leaked the route to Ward months ago for a price, of course." "Of course," Daisy said dryly. "You seem to have many convenient contacts, Kyle." A guarded look crossed his face. "I've been working on this a long time." "Why?" "What's your stake in all this?" He hesitated, then sighed. 3 years ago, my family owned a ranch in Colorado. Ward and his partners, different names then, same scheme, manipulated the bank into calling in loans across the county. My father refused to sell. There was an accident, barn fire. My parents didn't survive. Horror and sympathy washed through her. "Kyle, I'm so sorry. Couldn't prove anything, but I tracked Ward to Wyoming, took the job at Circle M to watch him." His eyes met hers, hard with determination. "I'm not letting him destroy another community." "Then we'll stop him together." Daisy reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "But we need that documentation. Bank's closed until Monday. Records will be in Thompson's office or the vault. Then we'll have to get them tomorrow night while Ward and Blackstone are celebrating their mine purchase." Kyle's eyebrows rose. "Breaking into a bank is a serious crime, Daisy. So is fraud." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, we're not stealing money, just examining records, and I have a key." At his questioning look, she smiled. "Thompson is rather careless with his ring when distracted by a lady's questions." A reluctant smile tugged at Kyle's mouth. "You're full of surprises." "I'm beginning to surprise myself," she admitted. "I came looking for evidence of financial impropriety. I never expected conspiracy and danger." "You could leave," he suggested quietly. "Return to Boston, warn your father from a safe distance, and abandon the people here to Ward's schemes. Leave you to face this alone." Daisy shook her head. "I'm staying." Something shifted in Kyle's expression, respect perhaps, and something warmer. It's late, you should rest. I'll take you back to town at first light before anyone notices you're missing. And where will you sleep? She asked, suddenly aware of the cabin's single bed, chairs fine. He gestured to the sturdy wooden chair beside the stove. I've slept in worse places. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. The day's revelations tumbled through Daisy's mind Ward's threats, Kyle's tragic past, the audacious plan they'd formulated. Across the room, Kyle dozed in the chair, his features softer in repose than his usual guarded expression allowed. She found herself studying him, this enigmatic man who'd appointed himself her protector. There was more to his story. She suspected gaps and inconsistencies she hadn't had time to question. Yet she trusted him instinctively, in a way that defied rational explanation. Dawn brought birdsong and the soft glow of early light through the cabin's single window. Kyle was already awake, brewing coffee on the small stove. "Morning," he said, offering her a tin cup. "Hope you like it strong." The coffee was indeed powerful, but the warmth was welcome in the cool morning air. They shared a simple breakfast of jerky and hardtack, planning their approach to the evening's mission. "I'll create a distraction at the saloon," Kyle said. "Something to draw attention away from the bank. You slip in, find what we need, then meet me behind the livery. And if I'm caught—" "You won't be." His confidence was oddly reassuring, "but if anything goes wrong, just run. I'll find you." The ride back to town was silent, each absorbed in their thoughts. Kyle left her at the edge of Silver Creek, where she could walk to the hotel without being seen in his company. "Be careful today," he warned. "Ward will be watching you." "I'll be the very picture of a naive Eastern lady," she promised. True to her word, Daisy spent the day playing her role perfectly. She visited shops, chatted with townspeople, and even attended the small church service, where Reverend Phillips preached about honesty and integrity with unconscious irony. In the afternoon, she received a formal note from Ward, inviting her to celebrate the mine acquisition the following evening. She sent her acceptance, knowing she would likely be elsewhere when the time came. As dusk approached, she prepared carefully dark, practical clothing beneath a concealing cloak, her hair secured firmly against recognition. The bank key, copied from Thompson's ring, felt heavy in her pocket. At precisely 9 o'clock, a commotion erupted at the Silver Dollar Saloon. Shouts and the sound of breaking glass drew townspeople from their homes and businesses. Through her window, Daisy watched as men rushed toward the disturbance. Even the young clerk Thompson had left on night duty at the bank craned his neck to see the excitement. Seizing her opportunity, Daisy slipped from the hotel and hurried to the bank's side entrance. The key worked smoothly, allowing her access to the darkened interior. Using a small candle, she made her way to Thompson's office. The filing cabinet yielded little of interest, mostly routine correspondence and records of legitimate transactions. Frustrated, Daisy turned her attention to Thompson's desk. The drawers were locked, but her hairpin made quick work of the simple mechanism. In the bottom drawer, she found what they needed: a leather portfolio containing documents that outlined the entire scheme. Property transfers, shell company registrations, and most damning of all, correspondence with the railroad dated months before the route was supposedly decided, discussing payments for routing considerations. Daisy was carefully replacing the documents with her copies when a floorboard creaked behind her. She froze, candle guttering in the sudden draft. "Well, well," Ethan Ward's voice said softly. "What have we here? A lady banker working late, or perhaps—" "A thief." Slowly, Daisy turned to face him. Ward stood in the doorway, elegantly dressed as always, a small pistol held casually at his side. Behind him, Thompson shifted nervously. "I told you she was asking too many questions," Thompson muttered. "Indeed you did." Ward's smile was cold. "Though you failed to mention she'd stolen your keys." "A rather significant oversight." "I didn't steal anything," Daisy said, striving for calm. "I'm examining records related to my father's investment, which is my right as his representative." At night, through a side entrance, how resourceful. Ward stepped closer. "And what have you discovered in your examination? Evidence of fraud, misappropriation, and conspiracy." Daisy lifted her chin. "Enough to ruin you, Mr. Ward, if it reaches the proper authorities. If Ward emphasized the word, a considerable if under the circumstances. He gestured with the pistol. The portfolio, if you please. With no alternative, Daisy handed over the leather case. Ward glanced through the contents, his expression hardening. Comprehensive, he acknowledged, though ultimately futile. Who would believe accusations from a woman who broke into a bank at night, particularly when that woman suffers a tragic accident before she can spread her slanderous claims? People will ask questions if I disappear. Accidents happen, Miss Lockhart. Especially to Eastern ladies unfamiliar with the dangers of the frontier. Ward tucked the pistol into his coat pocket, keeping his hand on it. Thompson, bring the carriage around back. We'll take Miss Lockhart somewhere more private to discuss her concerns. As Thompson hurried away, Ward's facade of civility slipped entirely. Your interference is regrettable, Daisy. We could have had a profitable partnership. Now you force me to improvise, which I find most irritating. You won't get away with this, she said, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. But I will, I always do. Ward checked his pocket watch. Your cowboy friend should be thoroughly occupied. The distraction at the saloon was predictable, though I must admit, I expected him to be the one breaking in, not you. Daisy's heart sank. They'd been anticipated, their plan countered before it began. What have you done to Kyle? Nothing permanent yet. Sheriff Carter is holding him for assault and destruction of property. Ward's smile returned, though escape attempts can end tragically. Fear for Kyle's safety momentarily overwhelmed her concern for herself. Before she could respond, Thompson returned, visibly agitated. Carriage is ready, but we need to hurry. People are starting to leave the saloon. Perfect timing. Ward gestured toward the door. After you, Miss Lockhart. With no apparent alternative, Daisy moved toward the exit. As they reached the bank's rear door, a gunshot cracked in the distance, followed by shouts. What now? Ward demanded. Thompson peered into the darkness. Can't see anything. Wait, there's someone running this way, Ward cursed softly. Get her in the carriage, now. As Thompson grabbed Daisy's arm, she saw her opportunity. Jerking free, she slammed her elbow into his stomach with all her strength. Thompson doubled over, gasping. Daisy bolted into the darkness, running blindly away from the bank. Behind her, Ward's voice cut through the night. Stop her. Another gunshot, this one much closer. Something tugged at her cloak as she ran, but fear gave her speed she hadn't known she possessed. The planned meeting point behind the livery was too obvious. Ward would look there first. Instead, she turned toward the creek that gave the town its name, hoping to lose herself in the willows along its banks. The sounds of pursuit faded as she crashed through underbrush, branches tearing at her clothing. The creek loomed ahead, silver in the moonlight. Without hesitation, Daisy splashed across the shallow water, the cold shocking her system. On the far bank, she paused, straining to hear over her pounding heart. Distant shouts suggested confusion in town, but no immediate pursuit. She needed to find Kyle, or if he was indeed in jail, somehow help him. Moving cautiously along the creek bank, Daisy tried to orient herself. The town jail stood near the marshal's office on the main street, almost directly across from the bank. To reach it undetected, she would need to circle around and approach from the rear. She had nearly reached the back of the marshal's office when a hand clamped over her mouth. Daisy struggled wildly until a familiar voice whispered in her ear. Easy, Daisy, it's me. Relief flooded through her as Kyle released his hold. I thought you were in jail. Almost was. Sheriff got distracted by a fire at the land office. In the faint moonlight, his grin was wolfish. Amazing how those old buildings catch fire so easily. You started a fire, are you insane? Small one in the waste bin, enough smoke to cause panic, not enough to spread. Kyle examined her disheveled appearance. What happened? Did you get the documents? Quickly, Daisy explained her discovery and Ward's intervention. Kyle's expression darkened as she described Ward's threats. He won't stop now, he said grimly. We need to leave town tonight and go where? Mitchell's ranch. It's defensible and he has men who'll stand with us. Kyle took her hand. But first we need evidence. You said you made copies. Yes, but they're in my hotel room. Ward will look there first, then we'll have to be faster than him. Kyle led her through back alleys toward the hotel. Side entrance, quick and quiet. Get what you need, nothing more. They reached the hotel without incident. The night clerk was absent-likely drawn to the commotion in town. Daisy slipped upstairs to her room, gathering her copied documents and a small portrait of her parents that she couldn't bear to leave behind. Rejoining Kyle in the hallway, they were nearly to the stairs when voices echoed from below. Ward and Thompson had arrived. "Check her room," Ward ordered. "I want those copies." Kyle pulled Daisy into a storage closet as footsteps pounded up the stairs. Through the crack in the door, they watched Thompson hurry past, then heard the crash of her door being forced open. "Now," Kyle whispered, leading her toward the back stairs. They descended silently, emerging into the kitchen. The hotel's rear door opened onto an alley where Kyle had left 2 horses. "Can you ride astride?" he asked, helping her mount. "I'll manage." Daisy arranged her torn skirts as best she could, grateful for the dark clothing she'd chosen. They rode hard, avoiding the main roads. Behind them, Silver Creek gradually receded, its lights twinkling in the distance. The night was clear, stars spread across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Despite the danger, Daisy felt an unexpected exhilaration. The rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her, the wind in her face, the strong presence of the man riding beside her all combined to create a sense of freedom she'd never experienced in her carefully ordered Boston life. After an hour's ride, the lights of Circle M Ranch appeared ahead. Dogs barked as they approached, bringing sleepy ranch hands from the bunkhouse. Kyle explained the situation in terse sentences, and within minutes, the ranch was on alert, guards posted, rifles distributed. Frank Mitchell greeted them at the main house, his weathered face grave as Kyle outlined Ward's scheme and their narrow escape. "Always knew Ward was a snake," the old rancher said, pouring coffee for them, "but this goes beyond shady business. Threatening a lady, attempted kidnapping, that's hanging offenses. If we can prove it," Kyle cautioned, "it's our word against his, and he's got influence with the law in Silver Creek." "Then we take it higher," Daisy suggested, "the territorial governor." "These documents show conspiracy across multiple territories. That's a federal matter." Mitchell nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking, Miss Lockhart. I know Judge Harrington in Cheyenne, honest as they come, if we can get these papers to him." "Ward will have men watching the roads," Kyle warned. "Not all of them." Mitchell spread a rough map across the table. "There's an old mining trail through the high country, difficult terrain, but it cuts 3 days off the journey to Cheyenne. I used it during the Indian Troubles in '67. They planned through the night Daisy and Kyle would take the mountain trail while Mitchell created a diversion, leading Ward to believe they'd headed west toward the Utah Territory. "You should rest," Kyle told Daisy as dawn approached. "We leave at first light." Mitchell's housekeeper showed her to a small bedroom, where Daisy gratefully washed away the night's grime and changed into borrowed clothing, practical men's trousers, shirt, and jacket that would make the difficult journey easier. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by vivid dreams of pursuit and narrow escapes. When Kyle knocked softly at her door, she was already awake and prepared. "You look." Kyle paused, taking in her transformed appearance. "Scandalous." She suggested, self-consciously adjusting the unfamiliar trousers. "I was going to say capable." His eyes held appreciation rather than shock. "The mountains won't know what hit them." Breakfast was hearty and quick. Mitchell provided supplies, weapons, and his best trail horses. By sunrise, they were heading into the foothills, following a path only faintly visible among the rocks and scrub pine. The journey was arduous. The trail climbed steeply, switchbacking through increasingly rugged terrain. By midday, they'd left the rolling ranch land far behind, entering a world of dramatic cliffs and deep, shadowed valleys. Daisy's eastern riding experience proved inadequate preparation for negotiating the treacherous path, but she refused to complain or slow their pace. They stopped briefly at noon, sharing jerky and hardtack in the shade of a massive boulder. Kyle studied her with undisguised admiration. "You're not what I expected," he admitted. "When you stepped off that stagecoach, all fine clothes and proper manners, I thought you'd be helpless out here." "I've surprised myself," Daisy confessed. "I've never broken into a building, fled gunfire, or worn trousers before. My finishing school would be appalled." "Their loss." Kyle's smile warmed his usually guarded features. You belong out here, Daisy. You come alive in ways I never saw in town. The observation startled her, partly because it resonated with her own feelings. The dangers and discomforts of their situation hadn't diminished her sense of purpose, if anything, they'd clarified it. Tell me about your family, she said as they continued their journey. Before Ward's scheme in Colorado, Kyle was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice held carefully controlled emotion. My father was a good man, stubborn, hardworking, honest to a fault, built our ranch from nothing after the war. My mother was Eastern, like you, educated, refined. Folks were surprised when she stayed, but she loved the land as much as Pa did. And you had siblings? Sister Emma, she was back east at school when he trailed off. She's in Philadelphia now, married to a doctor. I write when I can, but it's better she doesn't know what I'm doing. Safer for her. And what exactly are you doing, Kyle? Besides working as a ranch foreman while investigating fraudulent land schemes, he gave her a sidelong glance. You're asking if I'm more than I appear. You speak like an educated man. You understand complex financial transactions. You have contacts in government offices. You're not just a cowboy. I was once. Then I was a law student in Denver. Kyle's expression hardened. After my parents died, I left that life behind. Became what I needed to be to find justice. A vigilante, if necessary. He met her gaze directly. Does that trouble you? Daisy considered the question seriously. A month ago, perhaps now. I'm not sure there's another way to fight men like Ward, who manipulate the very systems meant to provide justice. They rode in companionable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. By evening, they'd reached a small plateau where the remnants of an old miner's cabin provided shelter from the increasing wind. Storm coming, Kyle observed, studying the darkening western sky. We'll need to stay here tonight. The cabin was little more than 3 walls and part of a roof, but it offered protection from the worst of the elements. Kyle built a small fire, careful to keep it contained to avoid smoke that might betray their position. As night fell, the temperature dropped precipitously. Huddled beside the fire, sharing Mitchell's blankets, Daisy found herself drawing closer to Kyle's warmth. Will we reach Cheyenne tomorrow? She asked, trying to ignore the intimacy of their situation. Day after, more likely, but once we're over the high pass, we'll be on easier terrain. Kyle added wood to the fire. And less likely to encounter Ward's men, they'll stick to the main trails if they even guess we're headed for Cheyenne. Do you think Mitchell's diversion worked? Mitchell's been outfoxing younger men for decades. Ward won't know what hit him. The confidence in Kyle's voice was reassuring. Daisy studied his profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crook in his nose that suggested it had once been broken, the intensity in his eyes that softened only rarely. What will you do after? She asked. When Ward is exposed and Mitchell's ranch is safe, Kyle seemed startled by the question. Hadn't thought that far ahead. Maybe finish what I started in Denver or find another ranch that needs a foreman. You could come east, Daisy suggested, surprising herself. Boston has excellent law schools. Boston, Kyle's smile held gentle mockery. Can't see myself fitting in with society folks, Daisy. You might be surprised, Boston has its share of rough edges beneath the polish. She hesitated, and you wouldn't be alone. The implication hung between them, neither acknowledged nor dismissed. Kyle's expression turned serious as he studied her face. What about you? Back to your father's house and proper suitors? I don't know, she admitted. Everything's changed, I've changed. The thought of returning to drawing rooms and polite conversation seems insufficient now. Because you've seen real danger. Because I've experienced real purpose, she corrected. And because I've met people who live by their own truth rather than society's expectations. Kyle's hand found hers in the firelight, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. People like Mitchell, people like you, Daisy said softly. For a moment it seemed he might kiss her. The air between them hummed with possibility. Then, with gentle reluctance, Kyle withdrew his hand. You should rest, he said, his voice rougher than before. Tomorrow will be the hardest part of the journey. Daisy nodded, understanding his restraint even as she regretted it. Despite the attraction between them, their circumstances remained precarious. Emotion could cloud judgment they both needed clear. She slept surprisingly well, wrapped in blankets with Kyle keeping watch nearby. Dawn brought clearing skies and renewed determination. They set out early, climbing toward a high mountain pass that Mitchell had marked on their map. The trail grew increasingly treacherous narrow ledges with sheer drops, loose scree that threatened to give way beneath the horses' hooves, fallen trees that blocked their path and required detours. By midday, they were traversing a knife-edge ridge with panoramic views of the surrounding wilderness. "There's Cheyenne," Kyle pointed to a distant smudge on the eastern horizon. Another day's ride once we're down from these heights. As if in response to his optimism, the crack of a rifle shot echoed across the mountainside. Kyle reacted instantly, pulling Daisy from her horse just as a second bullet struck a tree trunk inches from where she'd been sitting. "Down," he commanded, dragging her behind a boulder. "Stay low." Drawing his revolver, Kyle peered cautiously around their shelter. Another shot kicked up dirt near his position. "How did they find us?" Daisy gasped, heart pounding. "Someone talked, or they got lucky," Kyle grimaced. "2 shooters, maybe 3, up on that ridge. What do we do?" "Wait them out. They're shooting uphill, difficult angle, limited ammunition." He checked his revolver. "Once it's dark, we can slip away. And if they come closer," Kyle's expression was grim, "then I'll handle it." They huddled behind the boulder as sporadic shots continued for another hour, then tapered off. The silence was almost worse than the gunfire. Had the attackers given up, or were they advancing on foot? As dusk approached, Kyle grew increasingly tense. Something's wrong. They should have made a move by now. A faint noise behind them confirmed his suspicions. Kyle whirled, gun raised, as a figure emerged from the underbrush. "Hold your fire, Grayson." The man raised empty hands. "Mitchell sent me, Sam Carpenter." Kyle lowered his weapon slightly. "Prove it." "Mitchell said to tell you Antietam 62, said you'd know what it meant." Kyle relaxed marginally. "Mitchell's verification code from his army days. What are you doing here, Sam?" Ward's men caught one of our hands, beat the mountain trail out of him. Carpenter gestured toward the ridge. "I've been tracking those yahoos since yesterday. Thought you could use an extra gun." "How many?" "3. Thompson and 2 hired guns from Laramie." Kyle considered this information. "We need to move before full dark. They'll expect us to wait for night." "There's another trail," Carpenter suggested. "Game path half a mile south, steep but passable, leads down to Thunder Creek. And our horses have to leave them, too exposed on this ridge." Gathering only essential supplies and the precious documents, they followed Carpenter through dense underbrush toward the alternate route. The game trail proved barely more than a suggestion, a treacherous descent down loose shale and between towering pines. They'd covered perhaps a quarter mile when shots erupted behind them. One of Ward's men had discovered their absence and raised the alarm. The pursuit was immediate and determined. "Keep going," Kyle urged Daisy forward while he and Carpenter periodically turned to fire, slowing their pursuers. Stumbling through gathering darkness, they finally reached Thunder Creek, a rushing, boulder-strewn waterway that cut through a steep, walled canyon. The roar of water made conversation nearly impossible as they picked their way downstream, half wading, half climbing along the creek's edge. A bullet splintered rock near Daisy's head. She looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the twilight sky, taking aim for another shot. Before he could fire, Kyle's revolver barked, and the man toppled forward, tumbling down the canyon wall to land with a sickening impact on the rocks below. "Keep moving," Kyle shouted above the creek's roar. "2 more behind us." They pushed on through the deepening gloom, the cold water numbing Daisy's feet as they waded sections too steep to bypass. Her Eastern upbringing had left her unprepared for such hardship, but determination drove her forward step by painful step. Near midnight, they reached a small hollow where the creek widened into a pool before continuing its journey. Carpenter led them to a cave hidden behind a waterfall, a shelter he'd discovered years earlier while hunting. Inside, the cave was dry and defensible, with a single entrance that could be watched easily. Kyle insisted on taking first watch despite his obvious exhaustion, positioning himself near the entrance where he could observe the approach. "You should eat something," Daisy said, offering him jerky from their supplies. Kyle accepted it with a tired smile. "You're holding up remarkably well for a Boston banker's daughter. Fear is a powerful motivator." She settled beside him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "And I refuse to let Ward win." "Is that all this is? Defeating Ward?" Daisy considered the question. "It started that way, protecting father's investment, exposing Blackstone's fraud. But now it's more." She met his gaze steadily. "It's about Mitchell and his ranch. It's about the people of Silver Creek who would suffer under Ward's schemes. It's about justice for your family. And us." Kyle asked softly, "Where do we fit in all this?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibility. Before Daisy could respond, Carpenter returned from checking the perimeter. "Creek's rising," he reported. "Storm must have hit the high country. We should move at first light before the trail floods." The moment broken, Kyle nodded his agreement. Daisy retreated to the back of the cave, her thoughts in turmoil. What future could exist for them? A Boston socialite and a cowboy with a vendetta, their worlds couldn't be more different. Yet something had changed in her during their journey. The trappings of her former life, the social obligations, the suitable suitors, the endless propriety seemed increasingly hollow compared to the raw authenticity of her experiences with Kyle. Dawn brought clearing skies and a decision point. The creek had indeed risen, making their planned route impassable. "We have two options," Carpenter explained. "North toward Laramie or east through Blackwater Canyon. Laramie's safer terrain but adds 3 days. Blackwater's faster but rougher going." "Blackwater," Kyle decided. "We need to reach Judge Harrington before Ward has time to cover his tracks." The journey through Blackwater Canyon tested them to their limits. Sheer walls towered hundreds of feet on either side, while the path, such as it was, alternated between narrow ledges and boulder-strewn creek beds. Twice they encountered rockfalls that required careful navigation. By afternoon, Daisy was moving on sheer determination. Her hands were scratched and bleeding from scrambling over rocks, her borrowed clothing torn and filthy. Yet she pushed forward without complaint, earning grudging respect from Carpenter and something deeper from Kyle. They emerged from the canyon as sunset painted the eastern plains in gold and crimson. In the distance, the lights of Cheyenne glimmered like fallen stars against the gathering darkness. "We'll reach town by morning," Carpenter promised. "Can you make it that far, Miss Lockhart?" "I've come this far, Mr. Carpenter. A few more hours won't defeat me." Kyle's smile held pride in something more tender. "Let's rest here briefly. No fire, though we're still too exposed." They shared the last of their provisions while planning their approach to Cheyenne. Judge Harrington's residence was on the western edge of town. They could reach it without passing through the main streets, reducing the chance of being recognized. "Ward will have telegraphed ahead," Kyle warned. "There may be men watching for us." "Not for 3 bedraggled travelers coming in from the wilderness," Daisy pointed out. "They'll be looking for a well-dressed woman and a cowboy on horseback." Their rest was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Carpenter tensed, drawing his revolver. "Riders coming, at least 4, maybe 5. Ward's men," Daisy whispered. Kyle shook his head. "Can't risk finding out. Into the trees, quickly." They retreated into a stand of pines, watching as 5 mounted figures approached along the trail from Cheyenne. As they drew closer, Carpenter suddenly relaxed. "It's Mitchell," he said with relief. "And those are Circle M hands with him." Indeed, Frank Mitchell led the small party, his weathered face breaking into a smile as they emerged from hiding. "Thought we might find you along this route," the old rancher greeted them. "Figured you could use fresh horses for the last stretch." "How did you know where we'd be?" Kyle asked, accepting Mitchell's hearty handshake. "Educated guess." "I've spent 60 years in these mountains, know the trails better than most." Mitchell turned to Daisy, his expression softening. "You look like you've been through the wars, Miss Lockhart, but still standing. That's more than most Eastern ladies could claim after such a journey." "She's tougher than she looks," Kyle said, the simple words carrying profound respect. Mitchell nodded approvingly. "Brought supplies, horses, and news. Ward's in Cheyenne arrived yesterday with Blackstone." They're calling you two bank robbers and kidnappers with a substantial reward for your capture. That complicates things, Kyle observed grimly. Maybe not. Mitchell's eyes twinkled with mischief. Judge Harrington is an old friend. I sent a man ahead with a message he's expecting us tonight at his home. No official channels, no prying eyes. Mounted on fresh horses, their final approach to Cheyenne was swift and direct. Mitchell led them on little-used paths that skirted the growing town, arriving at Judge Harrington's substantial home shortly before midnight. The judge himself, a tall, austere man with penetrating gray eyes, greeted them at his private entrance. Inside, a warm fire and hot food awaited, luxuries that seemed almost unreal after days of hardship. "I've known Frank Mitchell for 30 years, Harrington told them as they gathered in his study. "When he says something's amiss, I listen. Now, let's see these documents you've risked so much to bring me." Daisy presented the copied evidence, explaining each piece as the judge examined it with meticulous attention. His expression grew increasingly grave. "This goes beyond simple fraud," he concluded. "Interstate conspiracy, corruption of government officials, attempted murder, these are federal crimes of the highest order. I'll issue warrants immediately." "Ward has influence," Kyle cautioned, "and money to buy witnesses." "But not to buy me," Harrington replied firmly. "I've spent my career fighting men who believe their wealth places them above the law." He turned to Daisy. "Your father's reputation will be protected, Miss Lockhart. The documents clearly show he was an unwitting investor, targeted specifically because of his good name." Relief washed through Daisy. "Thank you, Your Honor. That means more than I can express. Your courage in bringing this evidence forward deserves recognition," the judge continued. "Few would have undertaken such a dangerous journey." "I had help," Daisy said, her gaze finding Kyle's across the room. The following days passed in a whirlwind of official statements and legal proceedings. Federal marshals arrested Ward and Blackstone as they prepared to leave Cheyenne. Thompson and several bank employees were taken into custody in Silver Creek. The evidence proved irrefutable, particularly when several of Ward's associates turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency. Judge Harrington, true to his word, ensured Edward Lockhart's investment was protected and his reputation untarnished. Telegraph messages between father and daughter cleared up misunderstandings and brought relief to both. "Father insists I return to Boston as soon as possible," Daisy told Kyle as they walked through Cheyenne's Central Park a week after their arrival. The bruises from their ordeal had faded, though deeper changes remained in her confidence, her perspective, her heart. "Of course he does." Kyle's tone was carefully neutral. "You've been through a terrible experience. He wants you safe." "And what do you want, Kyle?" He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "That's not a fair question, Daisy." "Why not?" "Because what I want doesn't align with what's right for you." His eyes held resignation. "You belong in Boston with your father, your friends, the life you've always known, not in Wyoming territory with a ranch foreman nursing a vendetta." "Former ranch foreman," she corrected gently. "Judge Harrington mentioned you're considering his offer to study law in his chambers. It's a generous opportunity, and one that might eventually lead east. Harvard Law has an excellent reputation." A flicker of hope crossed his face before he suppressed it. "Daisy, we come from different worlds." "We did," she agreed. "But I'm not the same woman who stepped off that stagecoach in Silver Creek, and you're not just the silent cowboy who watched me from the shadows." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to return to Boston unchanged. I don't want to forget what I've learned about justice, about courage." She took a deep breath. "About love." The word hung between them, at once terrifying and exhilarating. Kyle's expression softened, the guardedness falling away to reveal the depth of feeling he'd kept carefully controlled. "I've tried not to love you," he admitted quietly. "Told myself it was impossible, impractical, that you deserved better than a man with my past. And now I'm wondering if I have the right to ask you to wait to give me time to become a man worthy of you." Daisy stepped closer, resting her hand against his chest. "You already are that man, Kyle, the one who stood against injustice when others looked away, the one who protected me, believed in me, showed me a strength I didn't know I possessed. Your father wants my happiness above all." His latest telegram says as much. She smiled up at him. He also says any man who would traverse mountains to protect his daughter's honor deserves consideration, regardless of his current circumstances. Hope bloomed in Kyle's eyes. "You told him about me?" "Everything. My father appreciates honesty and courage, qualities you possess in abundance." Slowly, as if still expecting rejection, Kyle raised his hand to cup her cheek. "I can't offer you luxury or position, Daisy. Not yet, maybe not ever, but I can promise you truth always. And a love that will never falter." "That's more than most marriages begin with," she whispered. When he finally kissed her, it felt like coming home to a home she hadn't known existed until she journeyed west and found not only justice, but her heart's true destination. Epilogue. 5 years later, Daisy Grayson stood on the front porch of their home overlooking Silver Creek, watching her husband approach on horseback. At 31, Kyle had matured from the vengeful cowboy she'd first met into a respected attorney, whose practice specialized in protecting ranchers and farmers from the predatory schemes that had once claimed his family's land. The house, modest but comfortable, stood on what had once been part of Circle M Ranch. Frank Mitchell, before his peaceful passing 2 years earlier, had deeded them the parcel as a wedding gift. "Land should go to those who love it," he'd said simply. "Mama, Mama." 3-year-old Emma tugged at Daisy's skirt. "Papa's home?" "Yes, sweetheart, I see him." Daisy lifted her daughter, savoring her warm weight and the scent of sunshine in her dark curls. Kyle dismounted in the yard, his smile widening at the sight of them. In his law practice clothing good suit, polished boots, he looked every inch the professional, though he still rode like the cowboy he'd once been. "There's my girls," he called, striding toward the porch. Emma wriggled to be set down, running to meet her father. Kyle scooped her up, tossing her into the air as she squealed with delight. "Careful with your sister," Daisy cautioned automatically, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her abdomen where their second child grew. Kyle climbed the steps to kiss his wife, his free arm encircling her waist. "How are you feeling?" "Wonderful," she assured him. "Dr. Wilson says everything is progressing perfectly." Their life together had found its balance, Kyle's law practice thriving, Daisy's work with the Territorial Education Board bringing her fulfillment, their family growing in this land they'd both come to love. Edward Lockhart visited each summer, delighting in his granddaughter and the western scenery he'd once only imagined. "I had a letter from Emma today," Daisy said, referring to Kyle's sister in Philadelphia. "They're considering a visit next spring." "That would be..." Kyle's voice held emotion he no longer felt compelled to hide. "That would be perfect." As they entered their home together, Daisy reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From suspicion to trust, from danger to safety, from whispered lies to enduring truth, their love had been forged in adversity and strengthened by time. The sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Silver Creek had changed, grown, prospered under honest leadership after Ward's schemes were exposed. The railroad had indeed come through, bringing progress without the corruption Ward had envisioned. Later, with Emma asleep and the house quiet, Kyle and Daisy sat together on the porch swing, watching stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. "Any regrets?" Kyle asked softly, his arm around her shoulders. "About staying west, about choosing this life." Daisy turned to face the man who had waited so patiently for her to see the truth in his eyes, the truth that had been there from the beginning, beneath the caution and the pain of his past. "Not one," she said simply, and sealed the truth with a kiss.